Here's your host, Alex Garrett.
Today's Alex Garrett podcasting features two radio personalities, one who's made a name for himself in Miami, one who's a local guy here in New York. Kid Curry and Frank Morano join me, both with their different stories in radio and how they adapted to where they are now. And so my first guest is Kid Curry. And Kid Curry, actually known as, real name is Kim Curry, but known on radio as Kid Curry, had been diagnosed with MS at a very early age of 50. Kid Curry, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Alex. My name is Kim Curry. I was a young radio guy in my hometown of Canyon City, Colorado. As a matter of fact, my dad came home one day and asked me if I wanted to babysit for the boss. And I thought that he meant that I was going to babysit his kids. But when I got to the radio station that day, I was told I was going to babysit the God Show. Every Sunday morning, they played the previous week's church services on the radio, and nobody wanted that job. So as a 17-year-old kid, I was the guy who ran the God Show. But, you know, every hour you're required to give the station identification. So as a 17-year-old kid, I got my headphones on. I've never heard my voice on the radio before, and I cracked the microphone open. I remember exactly what I said. This is KRLN, Canyon City, Colorado, the station with the news reputation. And as soon as I heard my voice on the radio, that's what I decided I was going to be. So I went to college, spent 2 years or so studying broadcasting. I got my oats and thought, well, I'm good enough at this. I'll go out and apply for some real radio jobs. And I got a full-time job offer in Knoxville, Tennessee. I was 22 years old at the time. I was there only about 6 months and ended up in Miami, Florida. Right after that, working over the next 25 years with some real radio legends who took me under their wing, taught me a lot of stuff. 25 years goes by, and then I'm the boss. I get to be the boss. And
Kim, as a radio DJ, were you a star? Like, were you well known in Miami at that time?
Well, you got to kind of say yeah on that. Here's the reason. First of all, it was the 1970s, and there were only 4 or 5. Well, at that time in Miami, there were only about 3 current music radio stations. And I was a little guy on the radio. I called myself Kid Curry because the name Kim, when I first got on the radio, you can't call a guy Kim in the 70s on the radio. So I had to always come up with different radio names. And a guy I went to work for in Knoxville, my first full-time job, crowned me Kid Curry. And when he called me that, I said, I don't even like that name. I don't want to be Kid Curry. And he says, well, then I won't sign your check. That's when I met the boss. So he gave me the name Kid Curry. And I had a very youth-oriented nighttime show on top 40 radio stations in Miami, in San Antonio, in Washington, D.C., and in Baltimore. So I was kind of a famous little teenage DJ back then, but eventually I ended up doing the morning show. I did middays, I did afternoons. And after doing it for 25 years or so, I was finally granted the opportunity to be the boss. And as a matter of fact, the boss of the original radio station I went to Miami to work for in 1976. I became the program director of that very same station in 1996. And we had the most success in the radio station's history over 9 years. But over those 9 years, I started having some maladies, physical maladies that had actually occurred earlier in my life at times, but had never really manifested into anything. I just thought I had the flu, or maybe I needed my chiropractor to pop my back so my hands wouldn't tingle and things like that. But around 2004, it was Christmas 2004, I came home to Colorado here to visit my mother from Miami. And my mom said, there's something wrong with you. Your face doesn't look right. Your eye is drooping. And at the time, my walking gait wasn't straight.
Oh.
And something was going on with my feet, and I didn't know what it was. So that all culminated into a diagnosis of multiple sclerosis. And in 2005, I was forced from the business with the diagnosis because radio is a constant. In those days, specifically, radio is now more corporate. What you hear in LA, you hear the same thing in towns all across America. But in the 1990s into 2000s, you really had radio stations that created their own thing. And Miami is very much a market unlike any other market because of the Latin influence. So I directed the radio station specifically at Miami, and it takes all my time. I mean, there are clubs there. I had to go monitor the clubs. I had to wake up at 2:00 in the morning to make sure the overnight person was saying the right things and playing the right music. And I'd be on the radio at 10:00 in the morning. And so I worked constantly.
Were you raising a family at that point when you were doing all this?
Well, yeah. By then, my wife and I had gotten married, and I guess it was 2000. It was 2000. We got married in 2000. So we had had a child, and so I was living a real hardcore life. I was working real hard. My wife and I were enjoying our life in Miami Lakes, Florida, living on Don Shula's golf course. But things just started going bad for me physically. But when multiple sclerosis, I didn't know this. I was at a corporate meeting over in Naples, Florida. When I got the call from my doctor, after all those tests, the doctor finally figured out what her assessment was, that I had multiple sclerosis. And I took that phone call at a corporate meeting. And then I had to drive back to Miami that afternoon after I got the diagnosis. And I didn't know you could die from MS because I didn't even know what multiple sclerosis was. As I'm driving back on Alligator Alley, my wife is doing the 2005 version of Google, and she's telling me all the things that MS is. And then she says, wait a minute, I think you could even die from this. So it was a mental thing for me. I mean, within a matter of a week, I retired. I got out of the business because to win like I was winning in Miami took all of my concentration. But then when I got diagnosed, the last thing I was thinking about was the radio station. And I did not want the station to falter. So I bowed out, and it went on without the success it was having when I was in charge, but it went on. And I kind of ran home to my hometown in Kansas City,
Well, let me tell
Colorado.
you, I want to say your voice hasn't changed. Like, you still got that strong voice. So I guess my next question would be how did you maintain such a strong voice going through MS and not being able to talk, right? So the whole thing about being in podcasting or radio is you want to get your voice out there. So at that moment, you weren't able to because you were going through this. What was that like? How did you overcome it? And I know you went to writing as well.
Well, as soon as I got diagnosed and I was failing fairly strong. I mean, I went from walking with a cane to crutches into a wheelchair within a matter of 2 years. My condition was failing fairly rapidly, and it really bothered me. And along with everything else that was going wrong, my toes were curling up, my eye was failing, my shoulders were hurting, my hands were curling, but my throat was also being affected. So basically, my throat was closed off. So I had all these things going on with me with multiple sclerosis for 8 years. And it's all I thought about. I went from broadcasting, doing what I had been doing for 33 years since my dad got the job, to suddenly all I was concerned about was multiple sclerosis because my condition was pretty miserable for 8 years. But then, when I first got diagnosed, there were only like 5 drugs for multiple sclerosis. By this time, there were then 8. And my doctor decided that the drug that I was on, that I had been on for years, was not performing well, and we needed to try a change. So he changed me from the MS drug Rebif to Copaxone. And he's a writer too. He's got a book out, Optimal Health with Multiple Sclerosis. He is the master of multiple sclerosis, and he believes that vitamin D is vital and absolutely important for multiple sclerosis patients. All humans need vitamin D, and all humans' vitamin D numbers are low. It just so happens that MS patients need more than anybody else. So he changed my drug to Copaxone. For 6 months, I took 5,000 IUs every day of vitamin D, and suddenly, after 8 years of my condition failing, it kind of leveled off. And at that point, it took me about 2 years to try to realize what was going on. All I was concerned with was I was failing, and then suddenly I was failing no more. I wasn't getting any better, but for 2 years, my level of my condition just leveled off, which then gave me the time to try to refine me. I had been a fairly important, successful radio broadcaster for years. The diagnosis of MS was another fairly tragic event in my life. So I decided I wanted to write the story. So, I went out and I hired a writing coach, the lady that founded the Northern Colorado Writers Association up here. She's got books out. She teaches writing. So I hired her to teach me how to write. And then I became a writer. But the process, it mentally was very distressing because, when you're thinking that, my wife, I didn't know what was going to happen with her. I've got 4 kids. I've been married a couple times. So I've got 4 kids and worried about them. My condition was failing. And so it really bothered me for a long time. But when the condition leveled off, I had to come up with a brand new thing. I felt I had hope for the first time in 8 years. So it was quite a path, but I couldn't have done it without the support of my wife. My wife is, some people can't take tragedy like this. And I know because of my meetings with men over 50 with MS that some wives couldn't take it and they left. Well, mine has stuck with me and allowed me to reinvent myself. She supports my writing career. I'm a self-published author. I pay for
Congratulations on that, by the way. And I got to ask you, so there's multiple avenues of adaptation. First, health-wise, adapting to this and overcoming it. Get into that a little bit more. And I know you were afraid that death was there, but how did you turn tragedy into another kind of victory? You had victory on the radio. Now you have victory fighting this thing. So tell us about that turnaround.
Well, my life really changed in a variety of different ways. I mean, not only, it was different even getting into a wheelchair because I had walked on crutches and then I was failing miserably. I'd fallen. The doctor finally said, no, you got to be in a wheelchair. So, I had to go out and buy me a new wheelchair, and that changed my thought process. And I in fact, when I went out for the first time in the wheelchair, I had a revelation because I was sitting, my wife was a realtor at the time, and they were having an office party. It was an all-white party, like Puff Daddy does those white parties. So everyone was dressed in white, and because they had all been my friends, and I rolled up to them in my wheelchair, they all crowded around, and they were all, ooh, this is really nice, congratulations, now you have more motion. And then the boss clinged on a glass, and he said, may I have your attention, please? And everyone turned around, and all I saw were white-clad buttocks. So my frame of reference changed. I see things from a completely different angle down here. And it affected me mentally because I don't know. I felt lesser again. I felt, wait a minute, this is another punch to my gut. I'm going to be in a wheelchair looking at people's butts the rest of my life. And it was really hard mentally. But, I also believe a lot in mind control, that you really are, you create your destiny. And when you have a woman around you like my wife, my wife is an international business coach. She coaches every day from 7 a.m. till 4 p.m. Every half hour, she coaches a business from somewhere around the world. She's a very positive person. And so you add that to my desire to always want to get better and be well and do something in my life. So the two of those things, really, my desire to get better and to do something, and her desire to make sure her husband is going to be okay with her kind of positive attitude, it really is. Our house reeks of positivity.
I love that, Kim. I've got to ask you then yourself, do you see yourself being a coach for those diagnosed with MS? Do you see yourself as sort of like a leader in this condition field, if you will, to say, yes, you can get through this?
I very much, I reach out to MS patients whenever I can. I go to meetings. I do the bike-a-thons as much as I possibly can. In fact, you know what? Here's what I've done a couple of times. MS is not, I'm diagnosed, but I know that there are people walking the streets that don't know what the problem is. And I've actually sat down with people who I can tell that they've got the same problems that I had. And I say, so how long have you had this MS? Oh, I don't think I've got MS. Well, do me a favor. check with your doctor, because I've got MS and you're doing kind of some of the same things I do. And I've actually sent people to doctors just through conversation, seeing how they're acting, and then their eye looking funny and their hand looking crazy, and me going, wait a minute, I know what you've got. So I just strike up a conversation to realize they don't know, and I've sent people to the doctor to find out. And so I really do what I can. It's important. I feel like I'm a member of a club. And it was funny, when you go to, here's what happened. I get diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. I start going to doctors. You go to the waiting room and you sit in your wheelchair and you kind of look at everybody. You don't really talk in the waiting room, but there's other people there. And then the doctor, after, 10 years or so, says, you probably ought to go to some MS meetings. I have a meeting group. It's men over 50. Why don't you go to that meeting? I went to that meeting, Al. I'm telling you, man, it was amazing, Alex, to realize that there were people just like me, that these guys were saying the things that were happening to me. Like, gee, I reached for a glass the other day and my wrist just gave out. Or, gee, I was standing there at a business the other day and all of a sudden I had to pee. And these are the same things that are happening to me. My eyes dimming out, happening to me. So it was unique to be able to be in a room who had the same condition as I'd never spoken to anybody. I'd seen them in the waiting room, but I'd never spoken to them until I went to those meetings. And so now I have a whole group of men friends. I go to the one over in Denver. I go to the one over here in Loveland and Fort Collins. I go to as many as I can. I'm an advocate. I want people to know that there is hope with MS. What bothers me is when I go to these MS meetings and some of the men are so frustrated because they've tried this drug and it didn't work, and they tried this drug, and then all of a sudden they say, I'm tired, I'm not going to take any drugs anymore. That hurts me. I don't want you to stop. I want you to keep trying, because I'm a hopeful guy. I want to give you hope. So I've actually, had kind of confrontations with men before who don't want to take drugs, because I don't want them to give up.
Have you talked to women also about this? Because I know that even women's insecurities are a lot more in this kind of field. So have you discussed them like, hey, you should stay on this. You should stay on this track to fight MS. My doctor's book, I have a box of them. I give them to as many people as I possibly. When I find out someone's got MS, I give them a book. That's what I do. And after I got diagnosed, I became friends with a young woman in my hometown who was the wife of an old high school friend I graduated with. And so 30 years goes by and they're divorced, but I run into this young, and then she's got MS. So she's been my MS buddy now for about 10 years. So we have, I do whatever I can. And women, MS affects all of us differently. I always say this is my MS, because what happens to me is not necessarily what happens to that MS guy or that MS person. So it affects every one of us differently, because lesions appear on different parts of the brain. My lesions are in the parts that affect my legs. Right now, as I'm speaking to you, my legs are seizing and sticking straight out. So it all depends on where the lesion appears. That's what part of the body is going to be affected. I have a variety of lesions. The lesion that affects my ocular nerve on the right side of my eye. I've got another lesion somewhere around my shoulder, in my brain. That connection's not right. So we all have different types of MS. And it's important that everyone realizes that there is plenty of science out there, and I believe there's going to be a cure someday. They're getting smarter and smarter all the time. Do you think that because I know there's campaigns for other, conditions saying know the signs, but you don't really hear much of MS advocacy on the TV, especially now since COVID. So let's say someone was diagnosed with this during COVID and maybe they were afraid to get treated. Like, did you have to help people through the pandemic as they were dealing with MS? Like, what was that like?
Well, MS patients, first of all, it's a very private disease. I didn't want to talk about it. And all the other patients, as I've talked to them about their career with MS, they didn't want to talk about it. And so it's a very quiet, silent disease. No one really wants to talk about it. There's a TV show I've been binging on lately. It's called Kim's Convenience. It's out of Canada. And this season, the season is about the mother being diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And I thought that was amazing because she's going through the same steps we all went through, where her hands are tingling and she can't get her fingers straight and she doesn't know why. And, her eye is bothered and she doesn't know why. Well, she ends up getting diagnosed. So now we're going through this whole process on this Kim's Convenience TV show. And so if you're an MS patient out there, we have a friend in Kim's Convenience. You can kind of watch that show and watch that lady go through the process. It is a scary process, but there is plenty of medical hope. I believe that. People do stems. In fact, I tried to get into a stem cell research program, but I'm too old for it. But I believe even stem cells are going to be some of the key to curing this disease. I believe MS will be cured in the next maybe 5 to 10 years.
And you might play a role with your vocals and your writing. Now, you mentioned earlier at 17 years old you did a religious program about God. And did that installation of faith, did that firstly instill faith in you at 17 years old doing that show? And secondly, has that helped you get through MS, the faith-based concept as well?
Well, Alex, I'm going to be honest with you here. I am spiritual without religion. I don't necessarily. My faith, if I have faith, is the fact that I believe in me. I believe that I was born on this planet with a brain just like everybody else. I was given the same opportunities, and I've picked all the right things for me. I am absolutely religious without being religious. I believe you wake up in the morning, you look out, you see the sun, and you think, man, it's going to be a great day. I believe it's in our DNA to be nice to people. I believe it's in our DNA to try to do good things.
Amen.
So that's what I've always been brought up on. My mother was a very positive person. We were not very religious. We were always told to do good things for people because that's what we're supposed to do. And, even as Muhammad Ali says, it's kind of like our that's how we pay our rent, is to do good things and be nice to people. So I'm not really very, very religious. I'm very spiritual in my own beliefs of the good things people have to offer and the good things we're supposed to do in life. I want people to understand that you don't have to have a religion to be good.
Well, that is fairly true. I agree with that. I think just if you believe in a higher power and you believe in the positivity, yes, there's a spiritual component that sometimes is missed, I feel. But I'm glad that you have this path that you're going on and that you realize that in yourself you can do this every day, and I hope others can radiate with that. Now, I got to ask you a fun question because you were a radio DJ. Favorite disc you ever spun on radio or whatever? What was your favorite album to play back in the day?
Oh, wow. Jeez. Well, here's the thing. Here's where my frame of reference in music is. Remember that when I was 17, actually when I, first on Top 40 radio back in the 1970s, the hit records I listened to were Casey the Sunshine Band. That's the kind of music that was out then. That's what Top 40 was playing. So now you fast forward to when I retired out of radio, I was 50 years old. My favorites were Puff Daddy, Wyclef Jean. So my frame of reference of music has always been current music. So the current music that I hear today, I love Billie Eilish. I think she's a smart young woman. I love The Weeknd. I think The Weeknd has lots to offer. So I can tell you that at the time I was on the radio, my favorites were the big hits of the day. And as I've grown up, I've stayed within the 18 to 34-year-old age group because Top 40 radio, if you want to win in Top 40 radio, you've got to appeal to 18 to 34-year-old females. Because remember, in the car, the girl controls the radio.
Yes.
So you always want to send your Top 40 radio listeners, you want to make sure that you're supplying 18 to 34-year-old females. So I love classical music. I love bluegrass. I'm a huge fan of rap. I'm sorry, some people don't. I love country. I love it all. I'm just a music guy. Always have been, always will be. There are little songs going off in my brain all the time. I wake up to a different earworm.
I sing when I'm on my rollerblade. I sing and just start singing randomly. You know what I mean? So I feel that.
There are earworms. I mean, you get stuck. Something made me, the other day, it was crazy because I woke up and I was in my mind, why would I be singing the days of wine and roses? I mean, that's from the 60s. What was I dreaming about to where I woke up in the morning and the first thing I thought was, the days of wine and roses, full of happiness. What is that? But that's what your brain does. Then I wake up the next morning, I got the Spice Girls on my mind. So
there you go. Though that's fun. Well, when you were a DJ, and maybe it's even more so now, but when you were a DJ, did you DJ with your mood, or did your emotions not play into what you played on the air that night? Did you just do it for the listener, or was there a personal feeling like, yeah, I'm in this mood, so I'm gonna play this music type of thing?
In real radio, you don't play what you want. You play what the boss tells you. And you may have 18 records to choose from, but you play what the boss tells you. So my whole thing was to entertain the people in between the records. I had a feature. In fact, that's why my memoir is called Come Get Me, Mother, I'm Through. Because I was on the radio in my young career from 6 to 10 p.m. at night, I was a teenage DJ. My whole audience was little high school kids. So before I got off the radio at 10 o'clock, I would have the kids just call in and make a comment about their school. They could rip their brother. They could make a joke about their uncle. And then I'd fire back some sort of comment. Mm-hmm. And I would just, at the end of it, I'd say, okay, come get me, mother. I'm through. Because the little kid guy on the radio had a mom to come pick him up. So
it's called bed check, right?
That's how I ended my show every night, was come get me, mother. I'm through. So when I wrote my memoir, I thought that should be the name of the book, because for 20 years, every kid when I was on the radio in Miami and in Washington, D.C. and in Baltimore at night, every kid knows that phrase, come get me, mother, I'm through. So,
hey, I'm glad you mentioned the writing, because that's my next question with adaptability. Going from the spoken word to the writing, from what I read in your bio, it felt like it was a bit of an adjustment. Was it an adjustment for you to go from spoken word to writing?
Oh, yes, sir. And I can tell you that my writing coach, Carrie Flanagan, she made me read books about how to write before she would even talk to me. For 6 months, I had to read these books. And Save the Cat Strikes Back is the one that mattered the most. Save the Cat Strikes Back. It teaches you how to write a novel. That you find a plant, you find one thing that you want to talk about, and then you weave stories that all come back to the spine of the story. So she made me read and study before she would even talk to me. And then she made me write, and she would take it, and then she would put the red pencil on it on the computer. You know, I get my little red pencil, and she'd correct my mistakes and made me practice for 6 months. At the same time, I was doing the research of my life. I had to go back to all the radio stations I'd worked at, some of the people I'd worked with, some of the promotions I had done with people and stars and things like that. And then, so I studied for 6 months myself. She worked with me for 6 months, and I researched, and then I wrote for 6 months. And every week, everything I wrote, she would be right behind me, giving me the red pencil. This is not right. You got to learn how to do this. So I believe that I've become a much better writer after I wrote my memoir. I wrote another book called The Death of Fairness. It's the tale of what happened to a small American town and its only radio station after President Reagan rescinded the Fairness Doctrine. Now, that was the doctrine that required equal time for contrasting points of view. In other words, if somebody went on a radio station or TV station and spouted some conspiracy, you, me, we had the right to go to that TV station or radio station and demand equal time to dispel the lie or the conspiracy. When you take that rule out, all you hear are lies, 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 without anybody debating the lies. And many people believe that the Fairness Doctrine being gone is why we have the division we have in America today. So that was my second book. And after I wrote that one, I just this last week completed an 85,000-word novel, which is the backup to The Death of Fairness. It's called Bonnie's Law, The Return to Fairness. So
Wow.
I love writing now. This is what I do. I blog on my website.
Give us the website, by the way, because I know that you have one. Give us the website for people to know.
As a matter of fact, you're going to see a brand new one here next week. I've just reconditioned the whole thing. It's krcurry.com. What you see now, if you go there, might not be the same thing you see next week, because I've just redesigned the website. But it will always be under krcurry.com, and you get information about the books that I've written, about where they're available. They're also they're on Audible and at Amazon. So,
is writing the way you feel like you're standing tall now in this wheelchair? Because I know that was that's sort of a thing that you deal with still today in the wheelchair. Does writing help you feel like elevated, like you're seeing above, sort of, as you say, the butts around you, if you will?
Well, Alex, I always used to refer to when I got diagnosed, and then the MS really hit me. Kid Curry, the guy who was running the biggest, most listened to radio station in the Southeast USA, people always wanted to be next to me. Kid Curry was the kind of guy you wanted to get close to. So, I was always a kind of a famous guy. And then suddenly when I got diagnosed, people walked away from me, because when you're on a crutch or you're in a wheelchair, people move away. So writing has once again given me that people want to be close to me. People want to know me. People want to talk to me now. I mean, I do podcasts a lot. People read my stuff now. So I've kind of like replaced my Kid Curry DJ thing, where people were interested in the animated radio guy, to now, they're interested in my reading and my writing. And so now I've changed myself from being the broadcaster to the writer. I'm comfortable again. It took me a while to adjust from being the guy people wanted to be close to being the guy no one wanted to be close to. And then now I feel much more comfortable because I found my place now. Again, I love writing. Every day, 4:00 in the morning, I'm right here.
But if anybody wants to relive the days of Kid Curry, can they go to YouTube, or do you have any of your old sets, that you did on the air at all, or?
Yeah. I don't own my stuff. People have put out my air checks and my tapes. So you can find these things on a source called American Air Checks. You can even look on a Facebook. You can go to Miami One. Miami One on Facebook has a variety of different of my old pictures and a bunch of my old radio shows. It's just, but these are friends of mine who have just kind of kept the old Miami vibe together, and they've put some of my old air checks up, and I hate hearing them. Sorry. I don't know why people liked the Kid Curry show. I hear it and I go, what were they hearing? What were they listening to? Well, I just think I was a crazy old wacky guy on the radio.
I hope your fans now know that you reinvented yourself in this new way through writing, and let me know when else you'd like to come on. I'd love to have you back on and talk about the Fairness Doctrine and so much else. So let me know other things happening, and I'll definitely bring you back on.
Thanks, Alex. I will be having information. This last book, Bonnie's Law, is now being shopped with agents right now. Looking to hear something here by the 1st of August. If not, I will self-publish it myself, and I'll have more details on that, and I'll let you know when it's going to be out, et cetera, okay?
Absolutely. We'll have you back. kcurry.com, is that correct?
krcurry.com. krcurry.com. That's me.
krcurry.com. You can find out more about this DJ turned writer and someone who's an advocate and a fighter with MS. So glad I had you on today, and thanks for joining.
Alex, that was a lot of fun. Thank you very much, sir.
Thanks again, Kid Curry. We'll be back with Frank Morano next on Alex Garrett Podcasting. Well, the big guests just keep on coming to this podcast. I'm very thankful that they do. And I'm very thankful for my next guest, Frank Morano, who you've probably heard on this podcast before. You definitely have heard him on 970 and WABC. And I call him more than just a radio host, my friend, Frank Morano. Thanks for coming in and checking in with us today.
Alex, thank you for having me. It's great to be on. I'm a huge fan of yours. It's been a thrill to watch your professional development over the last 6 or 7 years, and it's been really a pleasure to watch the growth of this podcast. You're doing great work, and I'm thrilled to be on.
Frank, I got to start there because 8 years ago about this time we were talking about the internship, and it happened, and then here we are, right? It's amazing how time flies.
Exactly. So it's great to be back, and again, it's great to see you doing so well.
And same with you. I know the last time we talked was actually when you were leaving 970, unbeknownst to me at the time, and going to ABC. So for maybe those who didn't, they know where you are, but for maybe they don't know the backstory and everything. How you doing? How's that been since going to ABC?
I think it's going really well. I am on every morning from 1 a.m. to 6:30 a.m. The first 4 hours is a talk show called The Other Side of Midnight. The next 90 minutes is sort of a news hour where Juliet Huddy and I give the news of the day. But the feedback from listeners has been great, and if people aren't familiar with the show, hopefully they can sample it. You can listen to the podcast at WABCRadio.com. But yeah, it's been great. I have no complaints.
Well, when I saw, and I'm glad to hear that, but when I saw this story, I had to jump in and get you on because you are in the radio business. You do the broadcasting. You're a host. And they say that's one of the toughest jobs, the most stressful jobs in America as of 2019, according to CareerCast.com. Maybe they don't count the pandemic with all this, but do you find it ever stressful as a radio and broadcaster to do this night in and night out?
Always. So it's always a great deal of fun. It's never boring, but it's incredibly stressful. I mean, basically on a daily basis, come up with 5.5 hours of fresh content every day is something that's very intimidating. I mean, almost my whole day goes into coming up with content for 5.5 hours. Additionally, radio and broadcasting in general, it's not exactly a field that these days is known for high salaries. So if you're interested in being able to pay your rent or your mortgage, that adds another degree of stress. But look, the people that do this, and I'm sure you can speak to this, Alex, but the people that do this really are hooked on it and can't imagine doing anything else. And that's certainly the case with me. And it's a profession that I'm honored to be able to make a living in, as stressful as it can be at times.
Well, and you've kind of had this role of the overnight, not really producing other shows. Are you doing any production work, producing wise, like you did here?
Just with the 5.5 hours of my own programs, that keeps me pretty busy.
I'm sure, and it's probably different than doing 4:30 and then getting up at 3 the next day to do another show. So it's probably a big change. But
this is true.
I've never asked you this because they say reporting, newspaper reporters are also under the gun and stressed out. Were you ever in the newspaper business at all? I never really asked you that.
No, not really. I mean, I've written some op-eds and some columns for different newspapers over the years, but no, I haven't. My wife she was a newspaper reporter when I met her, and she still freelances for Newsday. But no, I've always gravitated more towards the talk radio realm, although newspapers are as just as tough, if not a tougher business than broadcast journalism is these days.
Well, and these are two areas where people are like, well, it's going to survive. I mean, I think radio can survive. Do you think both mediums can survive in this ever-changing digital world?
That is such a great question, Alex, and it's one that keeps me awake at night. So in terms of newspapers, I don't think the traditional model of a hard copy newspaper is something that's going to be survive. However, that's something that's going to survive. However, I do think, and I apologize for the landscapers that my neighbor has that are choosing to do their weed whacking right beside me, so I hope there's not too much interference. I definitely think that news sources are going to survive and thrive. I think you are going to see a continued migration towards nonprofit news sources like ProPublica, which did some great investigative work in terms of the super wealthy people not paying much in taxes. The Marshall Project, which is a nonprofit news source that covers the criminal justice system, like WNYC, and on the right, you have groups like Project Veritas, which do some great investigative journalism from a nonprofit. I also think in terms of corporate media, you'll continue to see entities like Rupert Murdoch and his group continue to put out news sources like the Wall Street Journal and the New York Post, even if those divisions of his media empire aren't necessarily profitable. As far as radio goes, one of the things that I find very troubling is that you're starting to see new cars come out that don't even have AM radio. So now that's very scary on the one hand, but on the other hand, all of them provide an immediate interface to a mobile phone or to broadband to allow you to have access to whatever streaming site that you want and listen to whatever programming you want at whatever time. So I think the challenge for us as content creators is how to make our content compelling and how to get people to listen to it when they essentially have a choice of listening to whatever they want at any time that they want. I think the advantage that terrestrial radio has, especially on a local level, is that we can be local, right? If there's a blackout, for instance, you really can't download a podcast because you have no internet to find out what's caused the blackout and why that's the case. However, you can turn on 970 AM or 770 AM and find out the latest on why there's a blackout, when the power is going to be restored, and that's something that I don't know that podcasts and satellite radio and other sources are ever truly going to be able to compete with. So I think radio still has a few tricks left up its sleeve, but I think ultimately radio's fate is going to be decided by those of us that work in it to see if we can create content that's still compelling enough to get people to tune into.
Frank, you just mentioned a couple minutes ago how the cars are not picking up AM, but you can always get online. But aren't the rating systems still based on the AM dial? Like, isn't that still how we get ratings in this business?
Well, I mean, yes and no. I mean, the way ratings are measured is there's a sample group in every market that wears a device called a PPM, or portable people meter, and the portable people meter automatically picks up what you're listening to. So rather than pick up that you're listening on 970 AM, it'll pick up that you're listening on AM970theanswer.com and the live stream through the app. So I think it will change the game to some extent, but in terms of how ratings are measured, I don't know that it would change it significantly.
Well, I was just thinking that first of all, I was just thinking of how you do these, previews every night. Do you still do those things where, like, you do the fancy video before the show starts? Is that cut down? Because I miss seeing those, actually.
Well, not necessarily every night, but as much as I'm able.
And you still have a foothold at 970. You're on with John Katz. So what's it like to still be on here, even in that capacity?
Well, it's terrific. Look, working 6 days a week, as I'm sure you can attest, Alex, you're one of the hardest working people that I know. Working 6 days a week is exactly the same as working 7 days a week, because that seventh day, you're generally preparing for other stuff that you're doing on the other six. So it's great to be on with John Katzimatidis every Sunday morning from 8 to 8:30, and it's a great way to be in touch with the people that are early risers on a weekend, as well as the people that stay up late at night during the week. So it's wonderful. We get to hash out all the local news, all the national news, and it's always a great conversation whenever you have John and Mertavius, who often comes from different political perspectives.
By the way, speaking of local, we'll get to the race in a minute, because this mayoral race, it seems like it's getting a little more heated up by the day. You can attest that, because you're watching it as well. But I gotta say, new ownership at ABC, new ownership at the Mets. I mean, it seems like there's a parallel there, isn't there? Because both are being wildly successful.
Look, so far so good in both cases. WABC's numbers are up, and the Mets are having a great season, and it's an exciting team to watch. So far so good in both cases.
And I mention that because I know that your show isn't based around sports, but I know you love the Mets. That's one of your things, isn't it?
I am a huge Met fan, and it has been great to see. I mean, the pitching that we've seen from the Mets, I would venture to say, has been maybe the best pitching ever, and I am including the era in which we had Tom Seaver, Jerry Koosman, Nolan Ryan, and so forth. I've never seen such dominant pitching performances like this. I mean, even the pitchers that are not our top pitchers, Daniel Peterson, for instance, he's able to continue to dominate. I mean, it's just really, it's just a sight to behold. There are certainly some things to figure out for them, but I think given where they are, still in first place at this point, it's a lot better than a lot of us Met fans could have hoped for.
Now, as a newsman also, you've seen them in the news with this whole MLB memo, pitchers getting hurt left and right. Do you find sports is in the news realm far too much, or are they? What's the balance like for that coverage?
Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I completely understand your question.
Well, basically, I mean, do you ever cover sports on the show? And also, do you think sports is worth covering as a news topic as well? Do you find that intersection a lot more these days?
Well, so I cover sports and comment on sports when there's a nexus between sports and the rest of the news cycle. For instance, the decision Major League Baseball made to pull out of Georgia and boycott Atlanta and the All-Star Game over their election reform law. That's an area that transcends beyond sports. Sports teams choosing not to play because there's a police shooting in Milwaukee. That's an area that transcends beyond sports. LeBron James having no problem criticizing President Trump, but refusing to say anything that's critical of China and criticizing the Houston Rockets GM when he tweets something pretty innocuous about standing with the protesters in Hong Kong. Those are all areas in which sports kind of jumps off the sports pages, and those are the areas that generally interest me the most. Obviously, you have a lot of issues related to ethics in sports. This comes up all the time with performance-enhancing drugs. Also came up with the Astros cheating scandal, and you also have it coming up with this new sticky substance that they're banning in Major League Baseball. So those are the areas that I tend to focus on.
But I know you also do so much more on the other side of midnight. I love that title, by the way. It's so cool. But
yeah, I got to give our owner, John Catsimatidis, credit for that.
But do you feel that effect, like in the sense of people after midnight still calling you up? How's that like getting calls at like 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning?
Well, we get some wacky folks calling at that time, but I wouldn't have it any other way. If I wasn't on the radio at that time, I'd be listening to the radio at that time, and I kind of feel a kinship with the people that are up late listening, either because they're suffering from insomnia or because they're working odd hours or whatever the case may be. So I love it. It's terrific.
All right, so I think the $1 million question for you now is, because you're in radio and we did lose Rush Limbaugh, how does radio overcome that loss of such a stature? Because I think that was the thing that held radio together, wasn't it?
Well, it's a good question. I think in terms of what you're seeing in the Rush replacements, Dan Bongino in some markets, Buck Sexton, and I think his name is Travis Clay in other markets. I think it's Dana Loesch in other markets. I don't think you're going to see anybody in middays dominate to the tune of 600 or 700 stations the way that Rush did. So I think that kind of midday monopoly is over. I think ultimately it's going to come down to content. I mean, the thing that made Rush so successful, and I would agree with you that he was a pivotal part of saving the AM band in the 1990s. What made Rush so successful is that he was entertaining, he was funny, and he was different, and he was creative. So I think the challenge for broadcasters, in addition to competing with all these other places where people can get content, podcasts and everything else, it's going to be entertaining. If any of these commentators think they're going to come on and just pontificate about politics and think that's going to be sufficient to hold an audience, I think they're going to be really disappointed. I think the key is being engaging and entertaining the way that Rush was.
Well, and that's the thing. You can't really yell at the listeners because he never did that. From what I heard, he always engaged them. But Frank, for you, how do you de-stress? We talk about the stress level of this. How do you de-stress? Maybe you can give other broadcasters not sure how to de-stress some tips here.
It's a good question. Well, look, I do have a drinking habit that's larger than it should be. I do enjoy a nice cigar on occasion, and I like to read. So when nice weather like we've been having, to me, nothing better than sitting on our front porch and smoking a cigar and reading a book. So that's a lot of what that's a lot of what I like to do. And quite frankly, I enjoy listening to radio. It's one of my great pleasures in life, and that's what I end up doing quite a bit.
Well, by the way, speaking of reading, whenever you find a book, do you find like sentences or even a paragraph and say, I'm going to talk about that on the radio show? Do you ever find what you read make it to the air for your shows?
All the time. And that's it's a frequent source of content for me.
Well, that's very cool. All right, so other things about this job and your role with ABC that maybe people don't know that you can give us some insight on.
Well, I think that's about it, Alex. I mean, the nocturnal hours, the interesting callers, the struggle to come up with 5.5 hours of content a day. That's really about all there is to it. That's pretty much the Sloantown skinny of it.
Well, doing a daily 5-hour plus show, do you ever feel like the likes of Bob Grant are looking over you or Joe Franklin? Because I know you idolize those guys a lot. Do you ever feel more appreciation for what they did doing it right now?
Well, I think I had a pretty good appreciation for it even at the time I was listening to those guys. Bob, except for I think a very brief period when he was on OR in the 70s, I don't believe he ever really did much at night. He did late nights, but he never did overnights. Barry Farber and Joe Franklin, they certainly did do overnights, and I would, when they were alive, I would talk with them a great deal about getting lifestyle advice. And ultimately, it's not the kind of thing that you ever really fully adjust to, but I can't imagine, doing anything else. It's a lot of fun, and you have the freedom to do a lot of experimenting, to do a lot of wacky things, to do a lot of different things, and it's a freedom that you don't necessarily have in mornings or middays. So I've always had an appreciation for the work of all the folks that you just mentioned, and I don't think necessarily that doing this has given me a greater appreciation.
Well, I remember you did one time on the air, you had like a taste test here at the studios. I was like, this is so cool that you're doing that. All right, now the big question, because we know you're big into politics. I'm not sure how much of the show is covering the mayoral race, but knowing you, I know you're covering it because you are New York City. You got that New York City beat in you. So what are you thinking about this mayoral race? It's a pretty big deal, isn't it?
Well, it certainly is. I would, our friend Arthur Idala said to me about a year and a half ago, he said, and I think he was right, and his words have haunted me ever since then. He said, I think for the first time in my life, who gets elected mayor next time is actually more important to my life on a daily basis than who gets elected president next time. And I think he is right about that. I think whoever the next mayor is facing a New York City that is facing a great deal of challenges, and it's really going to be pretty interesting to see whoever the next mayor is, how they take us through all these challenges. I don't think there's been a time in our history, including during the fiscal crisis of the 70s, including after September 11th, where New York has faced so many different challenges simultaneously. I'm supporting our former colleague Curtis Lewa. I've been trying to help him with his candidacy as much as possible. On the Democratic side, there's a lot of interesting candidates with some interesting ideas. I certainly can see the appeal of some of the things Eric Adams says, some of the things Andrew Yang says. I've always had a fondness for Catherine Garcia. She always struck me as an effective manager. The candidate that frightens me the most on the Democratic side is Maya Wiley. I think whether it's criminal justice issues or budgetary issues or anything else, I think she would take the city in a very negative direction, and I'm hoping she doesn't win, but we'll see what happens. I'm hoping, even though this is a Democratic city, that Curtis is able to be competitive in the general election.
Well, Frank, you and I walk around with him like he's big in New York. Like, people may not realize this, but whenever we're walking with him, people are like, hey, Curtis, what's going on? I mean, that still happens today.
Absolutely. I think it happens on a daily basis, and that's one of the reasons I think people that are writing Curtis off as a sideshow with no chance of winning are really doing so at their own peril, because I don't think they understand the tremendous amount of crossover appeal and name recognition that Curtis has in this city amongst all sectors of the populace, including a lot of Democrats and independents. So I think it's a great point that you bring up, and I agree.
Now, on Curtis's front still, I was waiting for this moment. I don't know about you, but I was waiting for the moment where he would finally run for office. It just felt like it was leading to that, didn't it?
Yes, I think he's been preparing his whole life for this, from his time working in a McDonald's, from his time picking up trash with the Rock Brigade, from his time certainly running the Guardian Angels. I agree with you, and certainly his time on the radio, in which he's been commenting on every public policy issue of consequence that this city has faced over the last 30 years. I think he's been preparing for this for decades.
Yeah, and by the way, on Maya Wiley, just a note, she wants to keep the $1 billion cut to the NYPD and probably do more damage. So, yeah, let's stay away from her. But does ranked choice voting give candidates that you wouldn't think have a chance now?
Another great question. My answer is I think it does. All right. If this was the rules as they were about 4 years ago, where a candidate has to win 40% or the top two candidates would end up in a runoff, I don't think there'd be a realistic chance of Catherine Garcia being the nominee. But now with ranked choice voting, I think because a lot of voters may end up ranking her as their second choice, I think you could see a situation where Garcia does not end up with the most first choice votes, but because a lot of folks tend to rank her second, I think she could actually end up as the nominee. So I think the answer to your question is yes. I think it does keep a lot of candidates that wouldn't traditionally be in the race in the race.
I don't like throwing a lot of sports references out there, but it's almost like adding two wild cards to the playoffs, isn't it? It has that kind of feeling.
I think you're exactly right.
So, Frank, in this pandemic, you get married like literally a few months before it happens, but broadcasting during a pandemic, I'm sure you never really thought you'd experience that in your lifetime.
Well, that's the thing with being on radio, Alex, is you don't expect a lot of what happens on a daily basis, whether it's terrorist attacks, mass blackouts, shootings at City Hall, pandemics, race riots. You can never. It's just every day is a bundle of unpredictability. So it's certainly been an interesting year and a half, that's for sure.
And where can people find you? I know you tell it all the time, but where can people find you? What's your socials?
So people could find me on Twitter at Frank Morano. That's Frank, Morano. They could find me on Facebook at facebook.com/MoranoFan. It's facebook.com/MoranoFan. Or on Instagram at Morano Vision. That's Morano Vision. So I appreciate the opportunity to mention it, and I appreciate the great work that you're doing, and I hope you'll have me back soon.
Definitely. One last thing, because I know you cover this on The Other Side of Midnight. UFOs, are they really going to be hearing on them this month? I mean, this is crazy that's even going to be in the congressional eye. Isn't it a bit crazy?
Well, just this week, the House Intelligence Committee got a briefing from both the FBI and the Navy on what's going to be in this report that's coming out this month. I think a lot of your listeners may be aware that as part of the COVID stimulus bill, they put in a provision that indicated that the Pentagon and the intelligence agencies had to disclose what they knew by the end of this month. So ultimately, based on what we're seeing in the New York Times and elsewhere about what's likely to be in this report, they're saying that there are a lot of objects in the sky which the government simply can't explain. So I think the big question is, unlike what we've been asking for the last 40 or 50 years, which is not do these objects exist, whether you call them unexplained aerial phenomenon or UFOs, but what are they? Clearly, these objects do exist. The Pentagon has confirmed the authenticity of a lot of these videos. So the question becomes, what are they? And that's the question that I think really those of us in the media and a lot of folks in government need to be working hard to find the answers to, because I don't think the forthcoming report is going to have that answer.
Well, I'm sure you'll be covering it on the other side of midnight on WABC. But thanks for stopping by in between shifts, if you will, to talk to me on this podcast.
Anytime, Alex. I appreciate the opportunity, and best of luck to you and to your audience. And I look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you, and definitely going to see you soon. No doubt about that. No doubt. This has been an electric podcast today from Kid Curry. Yes, quite a career. Making a career now as a writer and as an advocate for those who have MS, having it himself and fighting it and surviving it, overcoming it every day. And then Frank Morano, our local buddy, local town, local friend, he also has, and you should look this up, been a very strong advocate for those who have psoriasis, and that's a worthy cause as well. So we all go through things, and we all overcome, we all adapt, and thank you to both Kid Curry and Frank Morano for telling their stories today on Alex Garrett Podcasting.